On cracked earth under a merciless sky, two frail puppies stood trembling before a lioness. Their thin legs barely held their weight, yet neither ran. Instead, both rose upright, tiny paws pressed together as if begging the queen of predators for mercy. Dust swirled between them, carried by a wind that smelled of hunger and storm. The lioness loomed, muscles rippling under a golden coat, her amber gaze fixed on these trembling figures. Every instinct should have driven her forward in a fatal strike. Yet the savannah held its breath. In that fragile stillness, innocence and death collided. For the first time, the wild itself seemed uncertain. Would it witness a slaughter, or something far stranger? The savannah stretched endlessly, shimmering under punishing heat. Dry grass bent in the wind, whispering secrets too ancient for human ears. Above, storm clouds brewed on the horizon, stacking into towering walls of shadow. The puppies, barely 6 weeks old, carried dust in their pale coats, creamy yellow and ghostly white. They were not just lost, they were exhausted, each rib visible, bodies quivering from hunger and fear. Still, they stood their ground. For reasons buried deep in instinct, they refused to flee. Before them, the lioness advanced like a phantom, paws silent, her breath measured. Predator and prey stood locked in a moment the world should never have allowed, yet could not look away from. The cracked earth beneath them seemed to pulse with anticipation, as if waiting for the verdict of nature itself.
The lioness lowered her massive head, shoulders rolling with silent menace. She took one deliberate step forward, claws whispering across dry soil. The puppies shook harder, yet did not retreat. One leaned forward, tiny paws still pressed as if in prayer. The other crouched lower, ears flattened, eyes wide with terror. The savannah seemed to shrink, pulling them into a circle of fate no wider than a breath. The air thickened, silence stretched. Somewhere in the distance, thunder muttered like an old god awakening. The lioness's eyes narrowed, her breath curling in the hot air. She could end them with a single strike. Yet her paws lingered, too long for instinct, too short for certainty. Something unsettled churned behind her gaze. And in that pause, danger became not just about survival, but about mystery. The puppies were not simply wandering strays. Their journey had already stolen the strength from their fragile bodies. Since dawn, they had scoured the savannah in search of water, shade, or salvation. Their paws, raw from sharp stones, trembled under their tiny weight. Dust clung to their fur, dulling their natural softness. Their eyes were pools of desperation, ancient in their sorrow despite their tender age. They had no pack to protect them, no shelter to conceal them. Still, they stood, trembling yet stubbornly alive, as if some unspoken force pushed them forward. The lioness before them was the embodiment of everything they should fear, yet the puppies, too small for courage, carried something greater: faith in the unseen. Their quivering frames were not defiance, but surrender to the possibility that mercy might bloom where death was certain.
Behind the thicket, hidden by twisted branches and thorny limbs, their mother lay broken. A lean Labrador mix, her once strong body now pinned beneath the cruel weight of splintered wood. She had fought to stay conscious, chest heaving in shallow, ragged breaths. Her eyes, once warm, full of guidance, dimmed with every passing hour. The puppies had found her that morning, her faint whimpers calling them home. They tugged at branches with sharp milk teeth, scraped paws against bark, whimpered for her to rise. Nothing moved, nothing shifted. And so, desperate and near collapse themselves, they turned toward the one creature they should never have approached. For in their tiny hearts, a dangerous belief burned. If their mother could not rise, perhaps the queen of predators might bend to mercy. The puppy's struggle was more than exhaustion, it was devotion. With tiny claws, they had clawed furrows into the earth beside their mother, whimpering as if their cries alone could lift the fallen weight. Hours passed, the sun scorched, flies gathered, yet still they tried. Their paws bled faintly, leaving streaks of red against bark and dust. Every attempt ended with failure, yet they did not abandon her. Each collapse was followed by trembling persistence. They pressed against her chest, nudged her muzzle, hoping for breath. When she stirred faintly, hope reignited. But the wood was merciless, her body trapped. Finally, with the sky darkening above, the puppies turned outward. They staggered into the wind, across the grass, searching for something greater than themselves. And in the impossible vastness of the wild, they found a lioness.
The lioness halted. For an instant, instinct surged through her like lightning, urging her to lunge and silence the fragile creatures before her. Her gaze burned with the ancient hunger of her kind. Yet in the silence, a faint sound broke, the whimper of the trapped mother behind the thicket. The lioness's ears twitched, her head tilted, confusion flickering across her gaze. Predator's instinct warred with something deeper, something buried. She lowered her body slightly, muscles coiled for a strike, but did not move. The puppies shivered, caught in that fragile stillness. For the first time, the lioness seemed less a predator and more a question carved into the savannah's silence. The moment stretched thin, fragile as glass, balanced on the edge of death, or a choice that could alter the story of the wild itself. The puppies spun, one stumbling toward the thicket before halting to glance back. Their eyes locked with the lioness's, a silent message in their trembling forms. The other puppy followed, but slower, gaze still darting back with fear. Their small paws dragged across the cracked soil, guiding the predator toward the broken shape of their mother. The lioness rose, step deliberate, as if testing the decision she had not yet made. Dust rose with each stride, ghostly trails vanishing into the storm winds. The puppies, fragile as candle flames, became unlikely guides to a queen of the wild. The savannah shifted, silent but watching. This was no ordinary chase, no ordinary stalk. It was as though the balance of predator and prey had been rewritten in whispers, and the ancient wild waited for its verdict.
Thunder rolled across the horizon, echoing like drums of war. The air thickened, charged with unseen electricity. Above, clouds twisted into shapes that darkened the earth, swallowing the last light of day. A gust of wind swept across the grass, bending stalks violently, filling the air with a chorus of rustling whispers. The puppies stumbled forward, ears pressed flat, yet did not stop. The lioness followed, her golden form illuminated by flashes of distant lightning. Shadows lengthened, stretched, and broke with every flicker of light. The savannah itself seemed to hold its breath, torn between silence and storm. The sky no longer promised safety. It promised danger, one that could rival even the predator walking behind them. Nature itself was stirring, and the storm's arrival would not ask permission. It would strike, relentless and wild. Step by silent step, the lioness moved behind the puppies. Her paws pressed into the earth with terrifying grace, leaving trails that dwarfed the marks of the fragile creatures ahead of her. She did not stalk now, she followed, though her gaze never softened. Each stride brought her closer to the fallen thicket, closer to the mother trapped beneath it. But her pace was not rushed, it was deliberate, as if she weighed every possibility with each step. The puppies, trembling yet determined, glanced back often, their eyes filled with both terror and hope. Between predator and prey, something unspoken formed, a fragile thread woven not from instinct, but from need. Overhead, the storm boiled closer, thunder cracking the sky in jagged declarations. In that moment, the lioness carried not just hunger, but decision.
The thicket appeared ahead, its branches jagged and cruel, twisted by wind and weight. The puppies broke into uneven trots, stumbling in desperation. Their whimpers pierced the thickening storm air, urging the lioness closer. The scent of fear clung to the clearing, mingling with milk and blood, a haunting perfume of both prey and persistence. The lioness slowed, nostrils flaring, reading the air like scripture. The fallen tree lay heavy, its roots twisted above ground like skeletal fingers. Beneath it, the faint, broken sound of breathing. The mother dog's chest rose shallow, her ribs trembling with each struggle. The puppies pressed against her fur, tails twitching in frantic joy before turning once more to the lioness. With every heartbeat, the air thickened. The predator had arrived. But would she destroy or deliver? Lightning tore open the sky, a jagged spear of white fire striking the earth nearby. The ground shuddered, dust leaping in violent clouds. The puppies yelped, huddling close to their pinned mother. Rain began in sudden, violent sheets, each drop striking like a stone against parched soil. The storm had arrived not as warning, but as predator of its own, merciless and vast. The branches above the mother groaned, shifting under the wind, threatening to crush what little breath she had left. The lioness flinched at the strike but did not retreat. Her amber eyes burned in the storm's flashing light, locked onto the fragile family before her. The savannah no longer carried a single danger. It carried two, storm and predator, both circling the same fragile lives. Which would strike first, and which would show mercy?
The lioness stepped into the clearing, rain flattening her golden coat into dark bronze. Wind shoved the thicket, scraping branches across bark with a sound like bones dragged over stone. The puppies pressed their bodies against the trapped mother, eyes flicking between breath and predator. The lioness lowered her head until the storm's reflection swam in her pupils. Every angle of her body spoke of power coiled and ready, yet her shoulders held an unfamiliar tension, a restraint that did not belong to hunger. The ground sucked at her paws as if begging her to anchor, decide, end this standoff. The mother's breath hitched. Silence opened like a chasm. Between the next heartbeat and the next flash of lightning, choice hardened inside the lioness, not spoken, not reasoned, but older than both fear and mercy, carved by something elemental. She moved, not toward the tender throats, but the tree. Muscles braided beneath wet fur as the lioness shifted her stance, bracing against the wind's shove. With a slow, deliberate sweep, she slid her foreleg beneath a jut of trunk, tendons rising like ropes, claws finding purchase in soaked bark. The wood groaned, lifted, then slammed back, splintering smaller limbs. Rain hammered everything, washing dust into muddy rivulets that crawled around the mother's ribs. The lioness adjusted, jaw clamped, breath gusting in white bursts. Another lift, higher, steadier, enough for the trapped body to shift. The puppies scrambled, pushing at their mother's shoulder with frantic, useless devotion. Through pain, the mother dragged one leg free. The lioness did not flinch, did not feed, did not flee. She simply held the world a moment longer, as if bearing the storm on her paws.
Mud swallowed the mother's forepaws as she pulled herself clear, inch by brutal inch. The trunk dropped a final time, sending a shock through the earth that rattled teeth and courage alike. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then the mother's chest rose, shallow but present, a frail bellows stuttering against the rain's cold fingers. Water streamed from her whiskers. Her eyes found the lioness with a dull, lucid awareness that cut through terror. Predator and prey occupied the same breath, the same trembling ground, as if the savannah had forced them into a single, impossible frame. The puppies collapsed against her flank, tiny bodies warming her with the only fire they possessed. The lioness rocked back on her haunches, soaked, breathing hard, watching. Not possession, not hunger, but a ledger closing. Thunder rolled a warning that the storm was not finished with them. Relief arrived too quickly, and with it, danger shed its skin and returned new. The lioness eased forward, closing the space between her muzzle and the mother's throat until rain gathered along her whiskers like beads of glass. The puppies tensed, bodies rigid as wire, their hope collapsing into a familiar, sharp-edged fear. The storm dimmed the light to a bruised twilight. Wind combed the grass into waves that broke against the clearing's rim. Each heartbeat counted like a drum in a narrowing corridor. The lioness inhaled deeply, drawing the scent of blood, milk, and mud into a calculus only the wild understands. Nature's balance hung on the span of a whisker. A single movement could reset the oldest law. The puppies trembled, the mother held still, and the lioness's breath warmed the space where endings and beginnings overlap.
The mother's body slackened. Her chest, which had fought with stubborn rhythm, halted, as if a hand had closed around the air itself. The puppy's small frames buckled, pressing harder against a warmth now cooling, instincts cracking under the shock of silence. The storm swallowed sound, then returned it in jagged echoes, rain, wind, the low boom of distant sky. The lioness did not move. She watched the absence like a hunter studies stillness, as if waiting to see whether death had truly arrived or merely paused. Water pooled beneath the mother's jaw, making a mirror of the mud. In that mirrored world, the lioness's face hovered over still fur, over unrisen breath, over the thin border that separates hunger from grief. For a long, aching second, the wild prepared to reclaim its due without apology. A cough tore the silence. It was small, ugly, beautiful, air stumbling back into a chest that had nearly surrendered. The mother's ribs lifted, then found a rhythm faint as moth wings. The puppies jolted, hope returning like fire fed new fuel. The lioness's posture changed by a degree too subtle for language, the stiffness draining from her shoulders as if the storm itself had eased its grip. No triumph announced itself, only breath, the most ordinary miracle. Rain softened, trading knives for needles. The thicket creaked but held. The lioness stepped back, giving the fragile family the space of a single body length, the difference between devouring and delivering. In that gift of distance, the clearing expanded, possibilities unfurling like leaves after drought. The wild had not reversed its laws. It had, for a moment, rewritten them.
They regarded one another across the low altar of mud, the lioness, sovereign of hunger, and the dog, keeper of small lives. No sound bridged them, only the flicker of eyes that knew different territories of love. The mother's breath steadied. Pain still climbed her ribs like thorns, yet something in her gaze held firm. The lioness's tail twitched once, rain drawing fine lines along the curve of her spine. Between them, the puppies, soaked, shivering, alive, became the proof that the world could tilt and not collapse. Wind shifted, bringing the smell of distant acacia and wet dust. If the savannah keeps a scripture, it is written in moments like this, not in words, but in the restraint that costs more than conquest. For a heartbeat, time loosened, and every creature present remembered it had been born from the same ancient dark. The puppies moved first. One lifted on uncertain hind legs, paws rising in that same strange posture that had once begged for mercy and now tried to shape gratitude. The other pressed its small head against the ground, ears flattened in an instinct older than language. The mother, breathing with effort, shifted to shelter them beneath the delicate arch of her neck. The lioness accepted none of it and all of it, eyes steady, expression unreadable, the rain glossing her fur until she looked sculpted from weather itself. There was no ceremony here, only the exchange of something unnameable passed along breath and gaze. Behind them, the storm's edge frayed, light thinning into a color that belonged to endings. The puppies held their poses a beat longer, then sank, spent. The lioness blinked slowly, an ancient seal pressed to a fragile covenant.
Decision completed its quiet circle. The lioness turned, each step deliberate, as if resisting the earth's attempt to hold her longer. She passed through the curtain of tall grass and became a sequence of moving shadows, then only the rhythm of parted stalks, then nothing at all. The clearing exhaled. Rain softened to a hush that left room for smaller sounds, the whisper of insects, the tiny thuds of mud loosening, the careful scrape of the mother adjusting her weight. The puppies climbed higher against her, studying the place where the queen had vanished. No roar marked her exit, no triumph, no claim. Only absence, generous and clean. In the mud, her prints remained, deep as wells, leading away from mercy as if it were merely a bend in her ordinary route. The wild closed the path behind her like a healed wound. When the storm finally slackened, the clearing revealed its ledger. Paw prints crowded the softened ground, tiny crescents from the puppies, staggered grooves from the mother's struggle, and the vast, unmistakable impressions of the lioness. They overlapped in places, parallel in others, telling a story that required no witness and yet begged to be read. Wind combed the grass into calm, and the clouds unraveled into tatters of silver. Somewhere beyond the ridge, a presence lingered, a sense that the predator's absence was not departure, but a watchful distance. The mother gathered herself, trembling, as if preparing to rise into a world newly complicated by mercy. The puppies nosed at the largest tracks, paws fitting inside as if considering futures larger than their small bodies. The earth held the truth like ink that would fade, but never fully vanish.
The storm withdrew with the dignity of a beast sated, leaving the savannah damp and luminous beneath a bruised sky. Pools of water reflected twisted branches like fragments of broken mirrors. The mother shifted weakly, testing limbs long pinned. Each movement carried the agony of resurrection. The puppies clung to her, damp fur clumping into fragile tufts, tails thumping against the mud in tired celebration. The air smelled of wet dust, milk, and the metallic tang of survival. Around them, silence thickened, not empty, but reverent, as if the savannah itself honored the strange truce carved into its soil. Paw prints lingered, each indentation dark with rainwater, proof that death had chosen patience for once. The lioness was gone, yet the clearing still hummed with her presence, a memory pressed into birth and breath, too heavy to vanish with the wind. By morning, the clearing bore the weight of two stories, one written in struggle, the other in mercy. Martha, an old ranger hardened by decades of tracking lions, arrived with boots sinking into wet soil. Her sharp eyes scanned the ground, noting trails that should not have existed together. The massive paw prints of a lioness walked beside the small, erratic marks of puppies. She crouched, tracing the grooves with calloused fingers, reading them like scripture. Her weathered face, usually carved in certainty, bent into confusion. Predators did not walk with prey. Yet here it was, an impossible testimony written by mud and storm. She followed the tracks until they bled into tall grass, then vanished as if the wild had swallowed its own secret. Alone in the silence, Martha whispered to herself, not in fear, but in awe of a rule broken.
Martha pressed further, eyes sharp, boots soft against the moist ground. For half a mile, the trail persisted, Lioness paw prints steady, the smaller tracks scattered but close, like children tucked beside a guardian. Then, without warning, the earth cleared. Grass grew tall and thick, washed clean by rain. No paw prints, no crushed blades, no trace. The ranger stopped, pulse quickening with a mystery her years could not solve. The savannah stretched endless before her, golden and inscrutable. She lifted her binoculars, scanning the horizon. Nothing moved but the shadows of clouds. Yet in her chest stirred a conviction that the lioness had not abandoned them, but walked on, hidden, carrying a story too wild for human proof. She lowered the glass, eyes misting. Nature, she realized, guards its secrets not with silence, but with careful erasure. Martha lingered at the edge of the grass, hand resting on her weathered rifle, though she had no intent to raise it. Her life had been shaped by pursuit, following tracks, measuring distances, predicting instincts. Yet this trail defied her craft. Mercy had no pattern, no logic. It was not something one could predict, only witness. She stared at the prints until the sun rose higher, bleaching shadows from the mud. Slowly, the imprints thinned, fading beneath drying earth. In hours, wind would erase them completely. The ranger's chest tightened. Proof of the impossible was vanishing before her eyes, but the truth would not die with the prints. It would remain in her memory, heavy as any scar, lighter than any lie. She turned back, boots carrying her toward the clearing where 3 fragile lives huddled in defiance of fate.
Weeks slipped past, carrying the storm into memory, but not erasure. In the gentle blush of morning light, the mother dog lay stretched outside a small hut at the savannah's edge. Her ribs, once sharp as knives, softened under new flesh. Her breaths came steady, not stolen. Around her, the puppies tumbled in the grass, their coats thickening, tails wagging with unchecked joy. The air carried the scents of firewood and damp earth, braided with the faint sweetness of blossoms that bloomed after rain. Martha sat on the porch, steaming cup in hand, watching them with a gaze balanced between relief and reverence. The storm had passed, but its imprint remained in every healed wound and every small leap of puppy paws. Survival was no longer a question. It was a hymn sung quietly into the morning air. Amid the tumbling chaos of play, one puppy froze. Its small frame stiffened, ears sharp, nose lifted to a wind that carried no sound. The other pup rolled in grass, oblivious, but this one stared outward, beyond the hut, beyond the circle of human safety. Its eyes fixed on the tall grass swaying in the distance. The blades moved not with wind alone, but with a rhythm too purposeful, too steady. Martha leaned forward, mug pausing mid-air. The world stilled. For one suspended heartbeat, the savannah seemed to return the gaze, ancient and golden. Then, as if embarrassed by its own revelation, the grass settled, leaving only silence. Yet the puppy remained frozen, chest rising fast,
as if recognizing a presence that belonged not to memory, but to continuation.
Later, when the ground softened with dawn's dew, Martha walked the perimeter. At the hut's edge, beneath the fragile shade of acacia, she saw them. Fresh indentations, paws too massive to belong to the dogs, pressed clean into moist soil. The pattern was deliberate, each print aligned with the grace of an animal that knew its strength. They curved toward the hut, then away again, as if circling, watching, blessing or warning. Martha bent low, fingertips brushing the impressions. Her throat tightened. She turned toward the horizon, but the grass stood empty, patient. The wild had left its calling card at the threshold of human safety, reminding her that mercy was not ownership, only visitation. The lioness had returned, not as predator nor phantom, but as a guardian who left no roar, only the echo of her passing. The puppies slept, curled into warmth, their sides rising with the peace of creatures too young to remember fear. The mother rested with them, eyes closed, muzzle softened in healing dreams. Martha sat nearby, the dawn unfolding in amber light across her weathered face. In the distance, paw prints stretched like a whispered signature of the wild. Relief lay in the healed family, symbolism in the meeting of mothers, and mystery in the shadow that still lingered unseen. Sometimes mercy arrives not as words or miracles, but as silence, paws pressing gently into soil, departing without claim. The savannah breathed, carrying the faint promise that not all predators strike and not all legends roar. Some simply vanish into grass, leaving behind questions sharper than teeth and stories too powerful for the earth ever to forget.